Hey, what is going on, everybody? And welcome back to the channel. Hope you're having a fine start to your morning. I just finished up my lunch and I think I'm ready to hop right back into Swift development. In today's video, we are going to continue on with lesson 3 of the previous episodes, where we are creating this drawing application right over here on the right side. And last lesson, I showed you how to integrate these two buttons on the very bottom that allows us to undo and clear off the entire canvas. And we talked about some object-oriented programming principles along the way. And today's lesson, I would like to wrap up this entire series by showing you how you can implement these color swatches right here, as well as the slider on the bottom right that allows you to control the color of your stroke, as well as the thickness of your stroke, like so. Okay, so hopefully that is kind of interesting. I always really like building out these types of applications because I'm really into drawing things using a custom canvas like this. So having said all of that, why don't we begin by introducing these color swatches on the bottom middle in the yellow, red, and blue, which are excellent colors that you might want to use when you're painting on a canvas. But anyhow, let's kind of continue on by going back to our view controller, which is this guy here. And at the very bottom, we have these two buttons, right? The clear button and the handle undo button up at the very top. I am going to go ahead and create a few more additional buttons that allow us to draw out these colors, which is really simple. The first thing you might want to do is to just say, let's see, yellow. So yellow button. I guess that's a pretty good name. Let's say yellow button equals that. And create a standard button with a UI button. This guy, we'll use that type and system. Button, we are going to use the background color just to set things up here. And then finally return our button. So this is how we create a standard button. If you want to have a outline around the border, it's very simple. You can access the layer using as the border color. I think by default is black. So all you have to do is specify the border width of 1. All right, and that is our yellow button that we want to add at the very bottom here. And you might be asking, well, how do you do that? Well, if you go inside of here, the stack view inside of setup layout, which is called in view.load, you can simply add the yellow button in here. The sizing, however, might not be exactly the way you want to size the components inside of your app. So at the very bottom here, you get this yellow button that has this black border stroke to it. So obviously you can configure the buttons however you want to configure them, right? This is just basically how you lay out some of the views inside of your view controller. And now you might want to create the other buttons. So let's just do this 2 more times. Copying and pasting isn't always the best thing to do, but for a video tutorial like this, copying and pasting will do just fine. All right, so we are going to use red and blue down below. And let's see, yellow, red, and blue. The next thing I would like to do is to say a red button and blue button like that. And you can run your code again. You'll get a couple of those swatches to appear in the middle section. And there you go. These little buttons look a little bit big. If you want to resize them so that they're a lot smaller like that, you might want to include another stack view. So what I mean is, instead of setup layout, right, you can create a colors stack view equals UI stack view. And let's see, we'll say yellow and red and blue. So I'm just showing you, one of the possible configurations that you can use to lay out some of your components. And hopefully this is helpful for you to understand how you can, customize your applications. But once you run this, you'll see this down here. The next thing you probably want to do is say color stack view and introduce the distribution, kind of like what we did in the previous episode of Fill Equally. And once you do that, you'll see that the swatches will have a different size and it'll start looking like this. All right, so pretty good. You can rearrange these components however you want. You might want to use the clear button on the left side. And then finally, you are going to want to create the slider on the bottom right as well. So let me wrap this up by creating the slider as a UI slider. So UI slider, let equal to a slider UI slider. I believe we just want to use that slider dot minimum value. Let's set some defaults here. Maximum value equals to 10 or 20, whatever you want this maximum value to be. All the way on the right, you can specify it here. Now, finally, we will return our slider, execute our closure, giving us our slider back. And then finally, at the very end of your stack view here, you can add in the slider just like that, just copying and paste the code in here as our slider. Once you run it, you'll see your slider on the right side like so. Okay, so that looks pretty good. If you want to include some spacing between your components, this stack view that contains everything, you are probably going to want to use a spacing of 8. And I'll run this now. There's going to be a slight issue on the right side where the slider ends all the way on the right there. And that's a little problematic. If you want to introduce some spacing on the right side, you can do this via the constraints over here or use some layout management on the stack view. I guess I'll use the trailing anchor and say constant and use a value of -8. That's going to push the right side of your stack view over to the left a little bit. So that's kind of what you get over there. Okay, so hopefully that's helpful. You can make the spacing value a little bit different, maybe 12, 24, or whatever these values are, you can play around with until you're happy with what you get. Okay, now that's pretty much how you lay out your components. The next thing I'll do is I'll hook up these color buttons right here so that whenever I start drawing on here, I don't always get this red color. And this is really simple if you follow this trick here. So let me go into the yellow button and say, the button that I create, I'm going to add a target on it. So self and selector, handle color change, and this will be touch up inside. All right, I'm going to add this same function for the red and the blue button. And the handle color change is just simply going to be a function down here and handle color change. But for this function, I'm going to include a button inside of the parameter list. Now, this means that whenever I tap on these things, it's going to actually call this function here. So let's see, add objective C. It's going to call this handle color function with the actual button, which means that the button right here, it knows what the background color is, whether it's the yellow, red, or blue. It's inside of this property here called background color. So I'm going to make use of this and hook up the canvas in a way such that in the public function section, we are going to say function and set stroke color is probably what I want. Let this first parameter be of type color. And right above, let me say, let's perhaps, use a file private, let stroke color, and this guy will be a UI color object. All right, you might want to say var, and maybe you want to default it to some, UI color dot black or something. So that's the very default color. And whenever you call this function, you're just going to say self.stroke color equals the color that you call this function with. And finally, the way we're going to hook this up is to go back into our view controller. Whenever we are tapping these buttons right here, whenever the color is changing with this method, we'll build our project. We can now say canvas.setStrokeColor, and we can simply use the button's background color like that. Now, because this is optional, you are probably going to use, let's see, the bang like this, or just use a default like black. That works as well. All right, that looks pretty good. If you run your code again, you can try to hit those buttons, but we haven't really set up the draw to use the stroke color. You can kind of see when you press these buttons here, you're still getting the red because we're using red here, right? Now, instead of using the red, we're obviously going to use the stroke color instead. So red is going to be replaced with our stroke color. You still have to call CG color on it, but that's not too big of a problem, right? We're going to run this again, and by default, it should be black like that. And if you hit the yellow, you'll get the yellow. You get the red, you'll get that. You get the blue, you get that. Now you can see that as I change the color, all the lines previous also change. color as you switch over like that. So that's something that we do have to fix. But before we get into that, let me also change the width of our stroke by modifying the slider on the right side. And this is very similar to what we're doing with the buttons on the left right here, the yellow, red, and blue. This is quite simple. If you just say add target, I think you want to say self pound selector, and handle slider change. And for this, I believe you want to say value changed. All right, let's go ahead and confirm that we can say add objective C, file private function, and let's say print out slider dot value. Now, as I move the slider left and right, you're gonna see it being printed out on the console below. So like that, all the way to the right side, it's close to 10 because we, specified a maximum value to be 10, obviously. And then finally, if you slide all the way to the left side, you'll eventually reach the value of 1. Okay, hopefully that's pretty self-explanatory. I don't think this is that hard to follow. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hook up the slider, and instead of printing out the slider value, you're going to want to say something like canvas and set stroke width, and we will pass in the value of slider dot value like so. So let me just write this code out, and set stroke width, we are going to create it as another function here. So function set stroke width, let this be of, I think it's a float value, and let's just do that. Finally, we are going to want to say file private var and stroke width, let's see, width equals I guess 1 as a default is okay. Let's use a float here, and then we'll say self dot stroke width equals the float value of this guy. So I think I might want to call it width instead. Makes more sense to me. And try to build your project. Everything is going to compile now. If you go back to your view controller, this code is going to be okay because I typed it out correctly. And if you build your project, this should be blue again. The last thing we need to do to actually get the stroke to actually take into effect is to make sure that our line width right here inside of the draw function, make sure to use the actual value of stroke width, which is the custom variable we created up here. So stroke width and color. This guy is a float, which means that you have to convert it to a CG float. We are going to run now, and hopefully the stroke will change. So let's see this in action here. And as I draw down, you'll see that the stroke width is defaulting as a value of 1, but as I change the width here, you'll see that the width gets a lot thicker. As I change the color, it does that. Moving all the way to 10, we'll change the entire stroke width to be just that. Okay, so that's kind of how everything works. Now, if you want to make it so that all of the lines that you draw inside of your canvas here, you want to make sure that they have a different color and also a different stroke width. You can do that by introducing some kind of container for your line objects. And so let me see if I can do this for you. If you look at your canvas, right, all of your lines are being captured inside of this two-dimensional CG point array. And there's not a whole lot of information about your lines other than the individual points regarding how your lines are connected. You can think of it that way. So instead of just capturing the points, we're going to have to capture additional information on it, such as the stroke color and also the stroke width per line. And one of the easiest ways of doing this is to introduce a model layer. Now, let me try to show you how this is done by, first creating a models group. Inside of the group, we'll create our model, which I'm going to call line. So line is pretty simple. It's just going to be a struct. So, whoa, that's not what I want. So struct, and I'll call it line, and I'll give it 2 properties. The first is the actual color. So you want to say color. And because this is a UI color property type, you're going to want to import UI kit like that. And for this model, we'll also say width, or maybe stroke width, and let this be of float 1. Okay, so that's just default value. I don't think you actually need that, so I'll leave that out. Sometimes your model objects are going to import UIKit. It's perfectly fine if it is a class that integrates with your UI view drawing classes, like what our line is doing. Now we have our line right here, and one final thing about our line is that we want to capture the points as well as a CG point array, so CG point, and we'll just leave it as that. Once you create your struct objects, similar to this structure here, you can call this automatic constructor that is now available based on the properties that you define on that class. And that's pretty much how it works. Hopefully that's pretty straightforward. Nothing too confusing about how to create line structs so far. With this class now, we can go back to our canvas, and instead of using lines as pure CG points, you can modify this to be an array of lines. So this is just an array of lines. This syntax here creates an empty array of lines. So by default, there are no lines in your canvas, right? So by default, it's blank, which is what this means here. And as you're drawing your lines out, you really want to now access your lines by a different mechanism other than this lines for each array. And let me see if I can do this here. So you have your lines, which is now an array of lines. You can say for each like that, hit enter, and you have your line here. And so instead of using this bit of syntax, what you can do is you can say for I and p and in line dot points like so. So that's going to give you your points. And I believe I need to say enumerate it like so. And just cut this code and put that in there. And now you can remove this and everything should work appropriately. Now the bottom right here for the touches began, we're adding just a pure CG point line right here. You don't actually need to do that. And you can just add a line instead. Now a line comes with this initialize right here with a stroke, with the color and also the points. And we're going to use the properties that we set up here, stroke, color, width, and let's see the points, which is just an empty array. We're going to do this. We're going to say stroke width, which is that. We're going to say the stroke color, which is that. And then the points right here, I'm going to create an empty array like so. I think that's all I need. So we're going to create an empty line right here. Now, as we add points to our line as we're moving across the canvas like that, we're going to add new points to our line object. So all we have to do is say last line dot points, append that point to that line. And you can't really do this because your struct right here, this guy is a let. You really want to make it a var. Go back to your canvas. This line of code should be okay, I believe. So that's looking good. We do the same logic here. And now we can run our code again. And as we, draw additional lines inside of our canvas here, you can see that as I change the color, it kind of does this little thing very similar to what we had before. And the last thing we need to do is during the drawing process for our lines here, whenever we iterate through this lines array, which is the collection of all of our line objects, we also have to modify the context to change the stroke color and the line width. So what I mean is I'm going to cut this code in here. And instead of using the stroke color of the entire canvas, we're going to use the line dot stroke color. So color is that, and I believe this is the line dot stroke width. Okay, and I believe someone corrected me in the comments below with the but line cap. You might want to say context dot, I think rounded, or is it just round? Okay, so just round. And we'll run this. I think I might want to, just call this again. And as I run through the code, you can see by default, we have a black line. As we change it to red, it kind of does that. As we make it blue, it does that. I think the last thing I might want to do is to move the context in here. And you really need to stroke the path after every path of your line is created. So you have black, you have red, and then you have yellow like this. You can see that as you are, making configurations to the context, you have to stroke the path and then you iterate to the next line, repeat the same configuration change, stroke the path again. And that's how you get this effect where a lot of your lines have a lot of different width values and also color values. Alrighty, everybody, and that's gonna wrap it up for today's lesson. If you're interested in more projects like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel. If you have any ideas for other applications that you want me to build out for you, make sure to leave a comment down below. That's gonna be it for today's lesson, and for this entire series. I will see you in the next lesson. Bye, guys.